landlords have been organized in a coordinated capital strike, where just as workers can withhold their labor to get what they want from their employer as a form of collective action, so too landlords can withhold their capital in order to get what they want, in this case, particularly from legislators. So 2019, the state legislators in Albany made a decision. Landlords, as a class, not just like individual landlords, but as a class, they were upset about that. And they figured out, look, we're going to withhold our capital from these buildings and create this narrative that says the city is just unlivable because of these laws. And we're going to do that until we get what we want.
I've been thinking that way, but I think you honed in on it, right? Like, this is a concerted effort, right? And this kind of narrative about the city, it's not a narrative in the say things are getting worse, right? But because on purpose. There are more rats, there are more garbage because they're not doing anything to take care of things.
Welcome to Uptown Voices. From Harlem to the Heights to the northern tip of Inwood, we're here to celebrate our people and together seek solutions for the difficult issues we're all confronting as neighbors. Regardless of what hood you represent, we share the same goal, creating the best community we can, somewhere to enjoy, where we can build our lives and raise our children. We want to thank 181 Cabrini, located on the corner of 181st Street and Cabrini Boulevard, for its generous support for this podcast. It's your neighborhood bistro just steps away from the North Walk of the GWB. Stay tuned for a discount code that you can mention to your bartender or server the next time you visit the restaurant. We also need financial contributions from listeners like you to produce, improve, and expand our content. To contribute, please scan the QR code on the screen or visit www.livingamericana.com. That's living without a G. What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 6 of Uptown Voices. I'm here with my brother from another mother, Led Black.
Yes, sir.
We're doing this. We're on a roll. I'm so happy that we're doing this. I'm so happy that we're doing this. And today we are talking to the Upper Manhattan Tenants Union, Adam Blasey and Emily Baez. What's up, y'all? We're going to be talking about an important issue, tenants' rights and the housing crisis in Upper Manhattan and truly in all of New York City. And we're doing this today. This is election day here. When this publishes, we'll have a new mayor. We don't know. Oh, actually, we won't have a new mayor because this is just the primary, so we still have to have the actual election, but it's New York, so more than likely we'll have a new mayor. Anyway, welcome. Thank you for being here. So Adam, tell me, I'm going to start with you. Tell me, first of all, about yourself. Where are you from? And then also tell me a little bit about the Upper Manhattan Tenants Union. What is this organization all about?
Sure. Thanks for having us on. So like you said, I'm Adam. I am originally from California. I moved to the city about 15 years ago for grad school. And while I was in grad school, I was involved with organizing a labor union, a union of graduate student workers at Columbia University. And, so I was involved from like collecting signatures for a petition to get recognition as a union by the university, to organizing strikes and towards our first contract with the university. And about 5 years ago, I moved in with my wife and my son into an apartment in Inwood, where we just experienced something like we had never experienced before in the city, where we were just with days, weeks without heat, hot water, pests and rodent infestations. My son would have nightmares of seeing the rats in the apartment, outside the apartment, throughout the building. We had an awful bed bug infestation, and with all the leaks in our ceiling, I just can go on. But with all these things, the management, which was Tri-Hill management, would always fail to address them adequately. And at one point, we were just like, "What is going on? Like, are our neighbors experiencing this?" Because we had just moved in at the place at the time, and so we started talking to our neighbors, and sure enough, like pretty much everyone was experiencing the same problems. A lot of our neighbors had lived in the building for a long time, and they had lots of battles with the landlord then, and then the prior landlord before that. Um, and we figured it made sense then to form a tenant association. So meeting regularly with one another, figuring out what it was we wanted and how we were going to get it. And so we went ahead and did that. And to me, it was sort of a natural thing to do because I had experience like uh, fighting with my other workers at Columbia
Yeah, you're
University.
an organizer.
Yeah, yeah, I didn't think of myself as such, but to me, it was like there's a natural thing you do. Like there's power in numbers, whether you're a worker or a tenant. It makes sense to figure out what it is we want and how we're going to get it against this antagonist, whether it be your employer or your boss, or in this case, the landlord. So yeah, that was a natural thing I thought for us to do, and it was pretty successful as a tenant association. We were able to get some changes that we wanted, but we didn't get everything. So we knew that the owner of the building owned a bunch of other buildings, and we started talking to other tenants of that landlord's portfolio. The landlord was Sugar Hill Capital Partners, which we could say more about, but they own a lot of buildings uptown, and so we started talking to other tenants of their other buildings, recognized there was a pattern of problems, and we formed a coalition called the Tri-Hill Tenants Coalition, called that because no one knew who Sugar Hill Capital was, because that's not who we paid our rent to. We paid our rent to Tri-Hill Management. That was the management company that worked on behalf of Sugar Hill. But yeah, we formed this coalition of tenants from a couple dozen buildings, and that was the start of the Upper Manhattan Tenants Union, which now is not focused just on Sugar Hill Capital, but is in general a tenant-led group that's committed to organizing tenants associations in our buildings and on our blocks to counter the violence of our landlords, whether that be Sugar Hill Capital or someone else, and to fight for safe, stable, and dignified housing for everyone.
Yeah, that's amazing. And Emily, you're part of this union. When did you join, and why did you join, and what are some of the benefits that you've found joining? How does it work?
Sure. So we have a tenant association in my building. I live in 4300 Broadway. And one of my neighbors, Adrian, introduced me to Adam because she heard about the things going on in my apartment. I had a few things. We didn't have any heat or hot water for, I want to say, about 4 or 5 months. And there was a lead issue in my apartment. I can go more into that later. And she introduced me to Adam. She said, you should absolutely talk to Adam. I think he can help you. He has all these resources. He's been able to help us out. Um, so I met Adam, and through Adam, I've gained a community of tenants that are going through similar things. I am in court. He was able to facilitate a lawyer for me and for my case. And I've just been able to get more involved also in the fight against, these landlords that have been they're predators, and they notice what we've always known about how beautiful the Heights is, and now they want to benefit from it.
A lot of buildings in Upper Manhattan have been acquired by private equity and other bankers, and what they seemed intent on doing was to raise the rent as much as they could, and get the people who are living there currently out. But there was a big law that passed in, I think it was in 2019, that is preventing real estate and landlords from egregiously raising rents. And unfortunately, while that's a great thing for tenants, well, you'd think would be a great thing for tenants, unfortunately, landlords decided that they're no longer going to invest in fixing the buildings. So a lot of the buildings that they own are falling apart. As you described, those are just awful conditions to be living in. And Emily, you too, you seem to be, involved in a big battle over your apartment. So can you tell us a little bit more about your situation, Emily?
Yes. My building was one of I believe, Sugar Hill Capital invested in about 52 buildings in Upper Manhattan. I may be wrong, but I think that's about the number. What they did in my building in particular was they came in about 2014 and they bought out 16 families. They offered them checks of 25K and basically told them, hey, you have to move out. And I mean, if you take this check, you just have to move out. And what they did to those apartments, my apartment was one of them, is that they renovated them. Some of these renovations were with permits, some were not. My apartment, there's no record of a permit. And they do claim, however, that they spent about $76,000 in 2014 in renovations in my apartment. And then what they've done is the last time that they reported my rent to DHCR, it was $974 in 2014. And currently my rent is $2,900. They are saying that those increases are due to the renovations. However, there's no proof of what was spent in my apartment. And then we've noticed the same pattern for everyone that that lives in my apartment that has a renovated apartment, where all of a sudden there's a huge increase. It's egregious, and there's really nothing in the rent history saying why that increase occurred. So my building 4300 Broadway is kind of like the poster child that landlords use as an example of why these laws passed in 2019 are so awful. Because our building was sold in 2022 for 22 million, and then last time that it was sold in 2014 for 22 million to Sugar Hill Capital, and when they sold it for 12 million, which means that they lost $10 million. And they try to blame it on tenants. And really what happened is when they noticed that they couldn't deregulate as many apartments as they wanted, they stopped investing in the building. And the way that you see that is the building isn't serviced correctly, whether that be through hot water, heat, or lead, or just rat infestations. They just stopped investing in our building. One of the things that we suspect is that the apartments were deregulated illegally, and I'm currently in court right now fighting that.
And so, what happened? Did that go? Did they update your apartment? Did they
Yeah,
renovate your
so they
apartment?
renovated
And
my apartment. They claim to have spent $76,000 on renovating just my apartment. They did submit a check of that same amount, but there's no watermarks on it. It doesn't say well, it could have been for anything. It could have been for a boiler repair. So they try every dirty trick in the trick book to, cover up their lies. But yeah, I'm gonna fight tooth and nail for it.
And this was like their business model. Sugar Hill Capital wasn't alone in this. They were just particularly good at it, perhaps. Because they were a group founded. They were a firm founded by a couple of Wall Street executives, Wall Street bankers, and they just took the strategies that they learned on Wall Street and applied it to people's housing. During the 2010s, like you were saying, Octavio, it was taken as like a natural fact that real estate, particularly in New York City, was going to continue to go up and up and up. And on the basis of that assumption, these owners were able to get basically free money from banks and investors and the government on that assumption that they could drive up the value of, like, for instance, 4300 Broadway from what it was sold at in 2014, 2016 for whatever it was, 10 or 12 million, up to, the $21 million that Sugar Hill Capital bought it for. And one way they were going to do that is that they were going to buy rent-stabilized buildings, make conditions as bad as possible such that people would no longer want to or be able to live in them, and either get people to, evict themselves or offer buyout deals so that people would move out their apartments, and when people had vacated the apartments, they could allegedly do repairs to jack up the rent to the deregulation threshold, a dollar amount that once they reach that threshold, they can remove the apartment from rent stabilization. But that was the business model. It was common throughout the city. But what the 2019 rent laws, the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act, the HSTPA, in 2019 did, amongst other things, was it eliminated vacancy deregulation. It eliminated that threshold, which when landlords reached it, they could deregulate apartments. So in effect, those laws made impossible that one common business model of landlords throughout the city.
Hmm.
One thing I've noticed in my building particularly, I noticed they also warehouse apartments, right? So the apartment right next to mine, right, I think the lady died during COVID, right, and she was only paying $235, and they've never done anything with it. So is that tell us about that and other common things that the landlords are doing now?
Yeah, I mean, Emily could speak to this more, but the way I sort of think about it, and maybe this like seems controversial, but to me, this is like class war. Like there's this class, the landlords, and they are at war with people, tenants, working class people, and they have a bevy of tactics that they can use to get what they want. They being like landlords, and a way to think about what's happened over the last 5 years, 5 or 6 years since those laws were passed, is that landlords have been organized in a coordinated capital strike, where just as workers can withhold their labor to get what they want from their employer as a form of collective action, so too landlords can withhold their capital in order to get what they want, in this case particularly from legislators. So 2019, the state legislators in Albany made a decision. Landlords as a class, not just like individual landlords, but as a class, they were upset about that, and they figured out, look, we're going to withhold our capital from these buildings and create this narrative that says the city is just unlivable because of these laws, and we're going to do that until we get what we want. And one way they do that is they don't fix apartments, and they warehouse them. So the warehousing, I think that's one way to think about it. Warehousing is like just one way that they are trying to get what they want from legislators.
Right.
But hold on, I'm sorry. I just have to. That's some really deep stuff you're saying there, Adam. That's pretty amazing what you're saying, right? And I've been thinking that way, but I think you honed in on it, right? Like this is a concerted effort, right? And this kind of narrative about the city, it's not a narrative in the say things are getting worse, right? But because on purpose. Right, like so. The building that I grew up on, Wadsworth, that my mom has been there since 1979. The conditions are materially worse. There are more rats. There are more garbage because they're not doing anything to take care of things. And again, sometimes we don't see it, but I think that's deep what you're saying. It is a concerted effort, and it is coordinated.
Yeah, and, I mean, like in the context of the election, like people are familiar with the usual ways that landlords as a class do this. Like they donate millions of dollars to, for instance, Cuomo's campaign. Real estate is just pouring a bunch of money into his campaign because they think he'll be able to give them what they want. And that's an obvious way of putting out how they flex their power, but the less obvious ways are like warehousing apartments, not fixing leaks, this, that, and the other. I mean, those are obvious in that like we see them every day, but they're not obvious in that we don't see them as like part of like a coordinated plan to attack tenants' rights.
Right. It's hard to see it as a group because it's happening to us individually. And so only when some tenants like yourselves get together and organize and communicate internally first, and then you say, oh, Emily, you're having this issue too. Adam, you're having this issue too. Then it seems that people start to see, oh, wow, it's not just happening to me. It's happening to my neighbors, too. And then as you guys grow and new members of your union join from other buildings, you start to see that it's not just happening in my building and to my next door neighbors. It's also happening to the building down the block. And it's also happening. And what I think landlords and others maybe discounting is that nowadays we have a technology like what we're on today where we can actually get our voices heard on a larger scale without having to depend on mainstream media and other mainstream avenues that sometimes they don't seem to really give too much concern unless it's like a huge crisis, which this frankly is, or a very sensationalistic type of story, which these are not sensational stories, but they are unlivable circumstances. Led, I think now it's time to take a short pause so that we can pay some of the bills, right?
You want to tell them a little about donations and how they can help the show?
Absolutely. We can't do this without contributions from our viewers. You're going to see a QR code of the screen here, which you can scan, and that's going to take you to a contribution site where you can make a contribution towards Uptown Voices. It's going to be helpful for us to be able to elevate our production. We have dreams and aspirations of doing live shows. We have dreams and aspirations of being on location at our various cultural institutions, and we can't do that without contributions from viewers and listeners like you. And we also can't do that without our sponsors. In this pilot season, we are lucky to have a great sponsor, 181 Cabrini. It's our neighborhood bistro. Both Led and I are just steps away from 181 Cabrini, and we love it. 181 Cabrini is located right there on that corner of 181 and Cabrini, just steps
181 and Cabrini.
Just steps away from the bridge. So yeah, I love it. Led, you and I were there the other night.
Yeah, and we also met there for the first time. You and I, the first time we met, we had like lunch there, and it's my local bar now. Like since you and I both live like right around. It's my local bar. I spend a lot of times there. James Lee, the owner, is just an incredible restaurateur. Right, I think he's a great guy. He's super funny, but like the food is on point. Please hit up 181 Cabrini. It is really one of my favorite spots. But yeah. 181 Cabrini. The sangria is amazing. Everything in it. And you have to try the coconut bread pudding. They got coconut, they got chocolate, and now they got banana, but the coconut, outstanding. So like I said, it's the attention to detail for me. It's a great neighborhood joint. Thank you to James and 181 Cabrini for sponsoring this episode. And, if you want to sponsor, holla at my boy. You know what I mean? Let's make it happen. You know what I mean?
I just want to say one thing. We're going to have a redemption code at the end of this episode, which you can bring to 181 Cabrini for a special treat.
But yeah, without further ado, though, let's get to it. Let's do it.
So, are you seeing, Emily, in your experience, are you seeing more opportunities to voice what's happening and to surface it? And are your neighbors also sort of participating and growing their voice? Is this something new to you, Emily? Like before
Absolutely.
you joined, were you like involved in community organizing, or is this like a new thing that you're sort of finding yourself in? How's that going?
Right. So it's I think I wanted to mention also that I don't think it's a coincidence that these landlords are targeting places like Washington Heights. They're counting on people from our community not fighting back, right? Because a lot of us have been here for so long that we feel powerless against these entities that just have so much capital that we would never have. I remember going into court. I've been in court for 2 years now against them. And in the beginning, it was so intimidating to sit there and represent myself in this fight. And then I remember about a couple months ago, Adam was like, you know what? Let's do a call and let's invite members from the union to come to the courtroom with you and just be there for support and solidarity. And when I tell you that the lawyer that is representing my landlord said that he felt sick and he could not be in court that day, and he got up and he said that in front of the judge and left, um, the power in numbers and community is crazy. And it's really made me want to be there for other people just like me that are going through what I'm going through. I mentioned Led earlier. So I think what really pushed me to be part of this union was the fact that my daughter is scarred for life because of this landlord's negligence. My daughter did get lead poisoning here. She was perfectly healthy until the age of 6, and then she had a 10-minute seizure on an airplane, and then they traced it back to lead. So what that ignited in me is aside from being so mad and not being able to do anything about it, is just find resources, find help, educate myself, and be there for other people. And because I know I'm not the only person. I know people my age that have been affected by lead. I just never thought it would happen in 2022, or let's say even after the 1990s. So we can't keep allowing this to happen because it's been happening. You guys are from here. You know of buildings that everyone has had to move because the elevator never works, or the landlord just stopped making repairs, and they it's a form of war where they stop servicing buildings so people could leave, and then they can actually get the profit that they want from it. Or either just a distinction between apartments before and after Broadway. That's something that residents of Washington Heights have always seen, right? So enough is enough. And I feel like being part of this union has given me the strength and the courage to talk back and fight back.
Scott Castellano, Sugar Hill's Vice President of Asset Management, responded to an Uptown Voices email inquiry to say that Sugar Hill has not owned, managed, or been involved with 4300 Broadway in over 2 years and has no involvement in any of the matters you mentioned. He didn't add any further comment. No one from THY, the current owner of 4300 Broadway, responded to Uptown Voices' email inquiry. Michael Johnson, Vice President of Communications and Research of the New York Apartment Association, a trade association that represents landlords of rent-stabilized units in New York City, referred Uptown Voices to recent testimony from the University Neighborhood Housing Program to the Rent Guidelines Board about the growing financial distress in buildings. This tenant organization estimates that more than 3,500 buildings are highly likely to be in distress, he said. The fact is that most buildings in northern Manhattan have declining net operating incomes and likely do not have enough money to pay operating expenses and their mortgage payments. In short, these buildings have no capital and have no ability to access capital, he said. Buildings that seek help from the government through Article 11 tax breaks also tend to struggle. HDFCs have higher violation counts than the average rent-stabilized buildings, he added. We understand the concerns of renters, especially in the Bronx and northern Manhattan. The years of property tax increases and below-inflation rent adjustments have unfortunately put thousands of buildings in this position.
And I wanted Adam to kind of go back to that concept of, because I didn't know. I mean, in theory, I knew that there was new ownership, but you could feel the new ownership right before knowing there's new ownership, because all the dirty tricks, right? So like I said, my mom has been in the same apartment on Wadsworth in the 190s since '79. And my mother's old school, right? She has money orders, you know what I mean? And they told her she hadn't paid her rent in 6 years, right? So, but it was nonsense. And my mother kept every money order, right? There was one that my dad, he was irresponsible, he messed up, and they made her pay that one time, right? But there's all these dirty tricks that I see, right? So now I live in the 180s in Fort Wash, right? I'm not paying, I'm paying, market rate, but most of this building is, rent stabilized. And what I notice is that they don't give heat, right? He controls it via app, so it's at a whim, right? And then what's interesting is I don't have heat, I don't have hot water, and then it's all based on what he wants, and it's this weird thing that I felt like it did the landlords treat us differently before, and there's a new regime? Is that the reason? Because it seems like everything is much worse than it was when I was younger.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't have the answer. One thing that brings to my mind is that you mentioned before, we're talking about the housing crisis, and that's a common way that it's framed. Yeah, it seems like that's what it is. But I sometimes think it's more helpful to reframe it as not a housing crisis, but rather a crisis of tenancy, a crisis of being a tenant. And one reason I think that that's helpful is that it invites us to recognize that the crisis isn't one of just supply and demand, that there isn't enough housing to go around. Because, like you said, there are homes out there that are being warehoused and no one's being allowed to live in them. So it's not precisely an issue of supply and demand, but rather the issue is that owners have more power than tenants. Landlords are extremely well organized across their different firms and across the city and the state. Um, and tenants are much less well organized across the city. Um, so the crisis is that there's like this power imbalance right now, and um, so that's helpful. I think one from turning away from that the common way that's discussed about like, oh, we got to build more housing, got to build more housing, build, which that's not going to solve the problem. But also, once you think of it as like a crisis of tenancy, like this like power dynamic, then you kind of recognize like this isn't exactly anything new. Like this has been going on since there has been people who own homes, and then people who rely on those people who own the homes. Like this is before that even maybe like ever since there's been like property, there has been this sort of like crisis, and so. To call it a crisis makes it seem like it's something new, but it's not really anything new. But what is new is like the sort of like point we're at, the crisis. And I think the point that we're at, that they're all kind of describing, is that like 10 years ago, a big issue was, besides evictions, was deregulation of apartments because landlords had all these tactics, these means through which they could jack up the rents by deregulating the rent sales of apartments. Now they don't have those means to deregulate apartments as easily now. So now it's this point where they're just like stepping back from buildings, and where that leaves tenants is like kind of like this point of like hopelessness. Like just I have this like constant leak in my ceiling and I can't do anything about, and no one seems to care about it. I'm just like crying into like the empty space. Like no one is doing anything about it. Meanwhile, I have to pay more and more of my hard-earned money to these people who I never ever see, and yeah, nothing ever gets done. So it's just like this space of like hopelessness. I think that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, and
Yeah, go ahead, Emily.
sorry, and I
Sorry,
just
go
wanted to
ahead.
say that you're paying this money to these landlords, and then they're not even paying their mortgages. So it's like, what's happening? And then when you look at buildings that are owned, like for example, my mother lives in an HDFC building, which is a program that started in the 80s, where this was happening again, where landlords were not taking care and maintaining buildings, and then tenants gained ownership through programs in the city. And my mom's rent in her building is 368. It does not go over 500, and the buildings are way better maintained than these properties that are owned by these landlords. And then you look at that and you're just like, it has nothing to, they don't see us as families that are raising our families here, or just people. They just see the dollar sign, and are they winning or are they losing? And they see us as a loss, so they don't care.
And yeah,
Yeah.
talking about Emily's mom, like I think to me, like I think there is sort of this state of like hopelessness, but I think stories like that like offer us some kind of hope and like path forward, because this isn't anything new. It's like a cycle, you know. Like the city was in a sort of similar state, 40, 50 years ago, where the laws were changed in tenants' favor. The rent stabilization laws were introduced in the 70s, and owners just abandoned buildings, huge swaths of the city. So the landlords just abandoned them basically. The Bronx is burning, and all of that. And that was a similar sort of like coordinated campaign to like to change the laws in landlords' favor. The city came up with a bunch of like solutions to that abandonment, and one of them being the HDFC program. And so I think we're at a similar point now as where the city was like, like 40, 50 years ago. And so it's a good time to like rethink like what happened then and what was done, and what could we do better? What would we do differently?
Yeah, I mean, we are dealing right now with what it seems to be is the corporatization or the ultra corporatization of rental buildings in New York City, and in particularly in Washington Heights and Uptown Manhattan, which has the densest amount of large buildings in the city. And I think what the corporate landlords, have, been fighting against the humanization of renters, and frankly, like you say, they've been applying their Wall Street tactics to their businesses, but they are seemingly rejecting the responsibility that they have as landlords
Right.
to provide livable spaces for the people who are living in their buildings. And like what you were saying, Adam, I think that they really benefited from really, really cheap loans. And then the people stood up and said, no, we can't let you just push us out. And frankly, push us out in general, oftentimes not even refill these apartments, just seeking for higher rents. And now that you guys have been organizing and collaborating, we had an episode a few weeks ago with the Northern Manhattan Community Land Trust. We're seeing a movement, I think, a more concerted movement. Are you seeing, it seems to me that we are, but Adam and Emily, are you seeing a more concerted movement of organizing, or do you think that we're still at the very early stages of this type of movement?
Yeah, I think there's. I mean, yeah, we got to say yes. We're part of a tenant union, so yeah, of course. Like, and this is it, or part of it. And actually, a month ago, or in May, we were a part of a group of tenant unions and organized tenants across the city that organized a citywide tenant assembly. So we just had a great full day assembly. 100 or so tenants from across the city got together and figured out, okay, what's going on, what have we been doing, and what is our horizon, or what are our paths forward. And that was the first tenant assembly that we had organized together, and there's expectation that there will be another one. And so I think there is this hunger for sure for people to, we don't want to just get the leaks in our ceilings fixed or the heat turned on. We recognize that there is this bigger struggle which we can be a part of. And yeah, so I think that is happening. I think there are some pieces to the puzzle that haven't quite fit together. So like the community land trusts, of which there are a lot in the city, are like a growing movement of sorts. And then there are like the tenant unions. And those are two pieces of the puzzle that I think are complementary probably, but haven't been really figured out how they go together. Like we don't really talk to one another so much. And we did talk recently with some members of the Northern Manhattan Community Land Trust, but it's we still haven't figured out how those pieces of the puzzle go together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, probably has something to do with money, getting the community land trust to actually, connect with the funds that the tenants unions would need if your buildings were ever to go up for sale again, and then you might be in an organized building coordinating with a community land trust. Perhaps you would have an opportunity there if they actually had resources from the state and the city for funds to facilitate, whether or not you want to, actually make a purchase of the building.
Right.
Even that, I mean, one of the things that I always think of when I hear about those things is as residents, as renters, in a way, we didn't sign up for this. We are paying rent. We are paying. As renters are paying for a product, right? They're paying to have a home. They're paying to have somewhere where they can live. And it doesn't seem that they're getting, what they're paying for.
Right.
And can I just one last thing? Sorry. Have you been speaking to our local leaders, and are they helping to perhaps make new laws that are going to hold landlords responsible, or at least have them make sure that they're providing a minimum level of service rather than what you guys are experiencing?
I'll let you answer that, Adam.
Yeah, I don't want to be too hard on it. It's election time. But I think two things to be said is one, landlords are engaged in a capital strike. I just think that's really important to repeat, in part because they've been successful. They've been successful at creating this narrative or this feeling that these laws change and things are really shitty now in the building, and then in our city because of those laws changing. We should revisit or rethink those laws. And it's not just a narrative that they're spinning. Like they actually last year in Albany, they voted as part of like the budget. They voted to roll back or weaken some of those laws that they passed in 2019. In fact, some of the same legislators who passed the 2019 laws, they voted in favor of rolling back those laws, in part because of their um, feeling the pressure from landlords and the narrative that they're sort of generating. So I think that's one thing that we need. We need elected officials to stand up better against that, to name what's happening, that owners are making this, putting forward this narrative that's not true, and regardless is their justification for violating tenants' rights. So I think that's one thing that elected officials can do a better job of, standing up against the pressure that's being generated by the landlord's capital strike, and not to roll back these laws, but rather strengthen them by, for instance, giving tenants more opportunities to buy their buildings, and giving them the funding, the financing to do so. A second, like more particular thing that like affected us and my building in particular is that we don't have a live-in super. Before the current owner, Sugar Hill Capital, bought our building, we did have a live-in super. It wasn't great, my neighbors tell me, but at least the super was there and it was like a constant presence. But Sugar Hill Capital bought the building, and the super was no longer there. This was a common tactic they did throughout their buildings, where they would buy the buildings, and as a way of cutting expenses, they would fire and evict the live-in supers, and then the supers, if there was one at all, they would be stretched thin, working like many different buildings, more than they're supposed to. And this pisses me off because there is like black and white law, like there's clear laws saying that buildings of certain size need to have a super, a live-in super, and supers can only work a certain number of apartments. Like it's clear as day, and it's clear as like what the law is, and it's clear as day that they are violating it. And we've gone to our legislators and said, this is what the law says, this is how they're violating it, what can be done? And they just kind of like put their hands up and say like, call 311. Like, no, we need to see something more than that. This is affecting not only tenants, but workers. I'm sorry, it pisses me off.
No, but hold on, you're 100% right though, because in my building it's the same thing, because the owners own several buildings. So the poor super, I like the guy, he's really nice. So he does live here, but he only works in this building from 8 to 11, and then he has to go work at the other few buildings in Fort Watch that he runs. And you're right, and so it's not his fault. But I want to get back to, because I think this is something that and sometimes we don't think about this that way. And I think, Adam, you put me on something really, like, this is class warfare, right? It is, right? It's an organized class that buys the influence to do what they want. Again, that's what that framing, though, to me, it helped. It click something for me right now as we talked, right? That if they have power, we have power too. And Emily, I think your story is beautiful, right? Because you didn't come from this world like Adam did, right? Adam was already an organizer, but you're with the person feeling the effects. And can you talk more about just kind of being galvanized by your circumstance, right? Like, why? Like, you know what I mean? Well, you could have gave up. You could say, "Oh, I got to deal with my daughter's illness," but it pushed you to do further. Why is that important to you?
Well, because I was born here in Washington Heights. I was raised here, and I've always heard stories of people being pushed out of their homes, and it never really impacted me directly. And it's really sad to say that I had to wait so long for something to not necessarily affect me directly, but affect my daughter, for me to feel like this pressure that I had to do something. I think that that's what has allowed the landlords to push us out the way they have successfully. And I wish I would have done it sooner, but thank you for saying that. Um, and what I do know is this. I didn't accomplish anything before. When I would just complain and tell management this is wrong, and tell my neighbors this is wrong, and this is going on. But now I feel like just the organizing has actually pissed people off to the point that they feel just like me, like no, something has to be done. And I think that if we can collectively just between each other get two more people to join the cause, three more people, four more people, we're gonna definitely outnumber them. And history has proven that when people are outnumbered, they kind of just fall back. And I think it's time for us not to do the falling back. It's their turn to kind of sit back and just either do what they have to do or leave.
I love that.
That's
That's
really
people
what it is.
power, bro.
Thank you.
People power. I love that.
Yeah.
People power. Yeah, I love it too.
Adams, so what would you say to people? Like, what? How's the regular tenant? How does anyone regular? Oh, I'm going through that. How do they get involved? What do you recommend? What should they do?
You should get involved with your local tenants union, and you should talk to your neighbors. If you're not already part of a tenant association, you should, form one with your neighbors. The point of a tennis, to me, while a tenant association is again, I kind of go back to analogizing it with a workers union. The a workers union is just a group of workers who get together to figure it out what it is they want their boss to do and what it is they want their boss to stop doing, and they make that happen through collective power. Similarly, a tenants association is just a group of tenants, two or more tenants. There's no form, unlike labor unions. There's no formal recognition process, but it's just a group of tenants who come together to figure out what it is they want the landlord to do and what it is they want the landlord to stop doing. We want them to fix the ceiling. We want them to not evict people or whatever it is. And we do that through collective action. So, yeah, talking with your neighbors, forming a tenant association, meeting regularly, and figuring out what it is you want to do, how you're gonna get it, how you're gonna escalate. Because it's like at this point, it's not uncommon to make these collective demands of landlords, and for them just to ignore you. So you have to figure out what is the sort of ladder of escalation. Like, what are we gonna do if their response is just to ignore us, or what are we gonna do if their response is to push back on us? So figuring out not only what it is you're going to do now, but what it is you're going to do after they respond. And yeah, get involved with the tenants union, the Upper Manhattan Tenants Union. We meet online normally the second and fourth Tuesday of every month, online from 7 to 8. And that's mostly a space for people to come and share the problems and solutions to whatever it is we're experiencing in our apartments and our buildings. And then we have other events and actions regularly too, but those are our standing meetings, second and fourth Mondays of each month.
So how do we find this out? Where do we go to find this information? Because I'm really inspired, right? So the lady in my building, Maria, this old Cuban lady's been here forever. She's the tenant person in the building. But I think some of these resources will be great. So how can people, where do they go to find this information?
You can find out more about the Upper Manhattan Tenants Union by going to uptowntenants.com. That's our website. And we also have an Instagram. It's at Uptown Tenants. So those are two things, two ways to learn more. And yeah, folks, we had a calendar there of events. Folks can come out to one of our meetings. And I think it's just as a point of humility, I think it's important to recognize what we're doing isn't anything new. This is part of just what we as New Yorkers do. This is part of New York's history. New York's history is not only written by the powerful real estate actors, but it's also written by tenants. We only have the laws we do, for the most part, in part because of the strength of the tenant movement in New York City throughout the last century or so. And so this isn't anything new. And there are people right now involved in the movement who've been doing this for much longer than we have. I think the one thing that differentiates us is that we're not a nonprofit and we're not tied to any party, political party. We are a grassroots group. We're just a group of tenants who recognize that nothing that we need done is going to get done unless we make it happen. People power, as you put it.
That's beautiful. And I also just want to add something to what you guys are saying, because I'm Led, super inspired by the work that you're doing. And I wanted to just say, Emily, and Adam, you guys are a great personification of the power that we currently have as people in this community of Upper Manhattan. Because I remember in the 90s when I arrived here as a transplant that the landlords really took advantage of the residents because there was fear, because they were mainly low-income immigrants, language because they didn't speak English well, and law. They would scare them with the law. And so a lot of people, for example, maybe wouldn't show up to court to fight their evictions.
Right.
And all you have to do is go to court to fight your eviction, and you basically are going to get a little bit of an extension. But what I find so interesting right now is like, Emily, you're a second, maybe third generation Dominican York, intelligent. You're tied to this community. You're not afraid. You speak English. You're educated. You don't, not only do you show up to court, but you bring your people with you, right? And they've activated something in you. You hadn't done this before. And now you're activated, right?
Yeah.
And others like you are getting activated, and they can protect their moms. They can protect their abuelas. And Adam, you've got this view and this position that this just does not work, and you have the experience as an organizer, somebody who understands how to get these things going, and you are helping your community to improve. So, I think that whether or not we're dealing with multi-billionaires, what we have here is a coalition of people from all walks of life and all backgrounds who are coalescing on a very important issue. And to me, I think that that's going to be what rules the day. So I also want to commend you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I will reject the commending because, yeah, to me, this is just like what we do. This is just what we have to do. And I know we weren't going to really talk so much about the election, but I think the election like points out something that Led was saying. It's like this class war, millionaires and billionaires putting tons of money to back Cuomo's campaign. Meanwhile, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people getting behind Zohran Mamdani and the slate of which he is a part of. So, and I think that's like apparent to most everyone who's paying attention to the election. But another thing that I think the election shows is that Mamdani, like he's got he's my guy, but he's not special, right? He doesn't have he's not a wizard. He doesn't have magical powers. Like he's good at like social media, and he is like smart and all that stuff, and he's handsome. But he's not like he doesn't have any magical power. What he can do, like coalescing people to take collective action together to get the changes that they need, that is something that is in all of us, and it is in fact just part of our history. And so in that sense, like he's not really that special. Anyone can walk from the top of Manhattan to the bottom of Manhattan. Anyone can work with their neighbors to get the changes that they want in their communities.
Right. And I just wanted to add that 592 178 is really my inspiration. That's my mom's building. These are people that are immigrants. Some of them don't speak a lick of English because they didn't have to in this community. And they were able to fight their landlords, and their North Star was owning it, taking ownership, and they did that. And all you need is willpower. You don't need to have a great education. That we are the translators for our parents from the time we're 3 years old. We fight their fights with them. So we have that in us already. It's just like you said, it's just something to ignite it, and I think this is the perfect time. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm sorry, Adam, you don't want to be commended, but you're going to be commended some more, both of you, right? Because,
Adam is so modest. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, because again, it's important, right? Because it's putting those pieces together, right? Because if it's me and my problems and Octavio and his problems and Emily and her problems and you and your problems, then we're nothing, right? When we come together. So, and I do think that you're right about that there's a continuity, but I also feel that there is a different wrinkle in that when I was growing up, nobody wanted to move to 192nd and Wadsworth.
Right.
Right? right? So now they do, right? But it's still the hood, right? Which is weird, right? So it's like, but that apartment. So I'll give you an example. So I grew up in 2F on Wadsworth somewhere. Right? I don't want to go. People come running on my mom or whatever. But one of my best friends grew up on the 6th floor, 6F, and he ended up losing an apartment. That apartment went from $600 a month to $3,000. So I think there's also that the I think the landlords are expecting something. They're expecting the new renters to be much more affluent.
Yeah.
So that goes back to the class war thing. So can you talk a little bit about that, Adam?
Uh, Octavio mentioned this before, but Washington Heights and Inwood have the highest like density or like amount of rent stabilized apartments in the city. And rent stabilization is a key part of what of the few things that make this living in the city affordable. We've only been in the city for 15 years, but I can already say like without rent stabilization, we would not be able to live in the city for sure. My wife, my family, and I. And to that too, like our landlord, Sugar Hill Capital Partners, they are bad, but they were only able to do what they able to do because they got money from banks, and the banks gave them money on the promise or expectation that the rents would keep going up, and that the rents would keep going up because you'd be able to push out grandma from her apartment that she's lived in for some number of decades, and then once she was out, jack up the rent. And so banks just gave landlords free money to on this expectation, and in particular, this was true in Washington Heights and Inwood. So Signature Bank, I don't want to get into too many details because this is like wonky as hell. But Signature Bank was a notorious bank for predatory lending, for lending to landlords in precisely this way, like giving landlords like mortgages that were way above what they could actually pay with the rents, because they expected, like, look, we'll give you this money and you'll be able to jack up the rents a lot. And so a lot of owners were over leveraged and they over speculated on buildings on that assumption. And Signature Bank just went wild with that. And in part because they were so egregious with their predatory lending, Signature Bank was shut down a couple of years ago by the state and federal government. And our group is a part of the citywide effort to organize in buildings that were financed by Signature Bank, financed by this predatory bank. It's a shorthand for it is that Signature Bank was Trump's bank. Not only did he do a bunch of lending through them, but one of his family members, sat on the board of Signature Bank. So Signature Bank financed a lot of rent-stabilized buildings throughout the city. But through our work, we've been able to see that the highest proportion of Signature finance buildings is in Washington Heights and Inwood. If you look at a map of buildings that have loans from this now failed or collapsed Signature Bank, it's just all over the board in Washington Heights and Inwood. And what that tells you is that a lot of the owners uptown were dealing with this known predatory bank with this shared assumption that they'd be able to jack up the rents. They have not been able to do that because of the laws, and now they're striking back.
And one thing that I wanted to mention, Adam once showed me a map of where these banks would lend more money to, and that line still existed of everything above, west of Broadway, had a green flag, yes, lend money to them. And when they used to look at Amsterdam, Audubon, San Nicolas, that was a no zone. So I
Yeah,
thought
it's
that was
modern
super
day
interesting.
redlining.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's redlining, right? That's what it was.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And it's also reminiscent of the crisis of 2008. Banks not vetting their loans enough. And this one egregiously
No,
based
but
on.
these weren't they were doing that on purpose. These people, right? Signature Bank was not doing this by mistake, right? That's they were. This was
Neither, neither were the bankers in 2008.
good point.
Those loans often were steered to brown and black people
Right.
who really weren't going to be
That's right.
able to make those
Or
payments.
even in
And
Compton, they did the same exact thing, where
yeah,
they used to give these first-time homeowners in Compton these loans that they knew they couldn't afford, and then just make them be in debt to banks forever. It's the same
Yeah.
thing over and over again.
It's a race to the bottom because if you don't get out from under your loan fast enough, and then something happens like this law, then you're going to be left holding the bag. And these landlords today have been left holding the bag, and they're doing something that's like really unconscionable. They're making life miserable for their tenants, and there should be a law, but apparently, Adam, there are laws, but they're just not being enforced, and so that's a real shame. We've had you on now almost an hour, so I know you guys have busy lives, and I don't want to keep you on much longer, but I do want to give you an opportunity, Adam and Emily, for any last words. And Led, before they get into last words, do you have any last questions that you wanna float out there?
Well, yes, because I know I don't have you guys all the time, so I do have to ask. First of all, I got to go vote soon, so I'm voting for Zohran as well. F Cuomo. Like say pause, no Cuomo. But one of the things is like, one of the things that like I find, I want to get both of your takes. What do you think of when you see what's happened to Inwood now, with the way it looks like a completely like different place? Like it's a canyon of skyscrapers now. What are your takes on that?
Yeah, it's hard for me. I only moved to Inwood like 5 years ago. But even in that shorter period of time, like it seemed like those buildings on 207 just like sprouted up out of nowhere all of a sudden. And so it makes me think two things. Like one is how, I mean, kind of what Octavio is saying is like, it's not just that owners are able to like make conditions like really miserable for us, but landlords are also just like, they are flexing their power to make this city their own, to make this their city. When it ought to be, it's our city, it's the city that we built, and so we ought to have control over it. But so to me, when I see those buildings, it's just like a reminder that they do have a lot of control. But those buildings are also a reminder to me, like I wasn't a part of it, but they're a reminder of the rezoning battle uptown.
Uptown not for sale, right?
Yeah, Northern Manhattan's not for sale. And so to that end, it's also a reminder to me of like where our power is. I think it's important to remember not only like the power that landlords have, like it's good to name that and identify it, but when you do that, it can feel like it's just like overwhelming, like they're just like unstoppable and like too powerful to take on. But then I remember too that there are examples that we can point to of where people have gotten together and stood up, and not with complete success, but at least with some success.
I like that, Emily.
It kind of reminds me. I heard someone call it self-indictment the other day, and then that made me think about the South Bronx, right? And what they've successfully done, and it makes me want, like, it's so important to talk to our older family members about politicians and not to vote for people just because they recognize their name. Adriano Espaillat, he has literally sold Dykeman, and he will continue to do so. And I'm sorry that I'm getting political, but
That's all right. You're allowed.
yeah, it worries me because I just know what that means for us as residents. Have you seen the prices of these apartments? They want to
Ridiculous.
charge 23 for a studio, 36 for a one bedroom, a two bedroom. They're not marketing to us. Um, I think that one of the reasons why Sugar Hill betted on our community was because of the fact that one of the best hospitals in New York is in our neighborhood, and they expect to have those people live closer at some point. And what better way to force us out than by leaving the buildings to shambles and raising the rents to places that we can't reach, right? So it's just scary times, and I hope that we don't become the next South Bronx or Williamsburg. But yeah.
Right. So bro. They call it
So
so
bro,
bro.
so bro.
So,
South
bro.
Dykeman is insane.
That's crazy. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Piano District.
The piano
Right?
district. Yeah.
Remember that? The Piano
Yeah.
District. I think that
Yeah.
died a fiery death. I don't think that anybody calls it that.
I want to thank both of y'all for being on the show. I think it's really important. I want to thank both of you for the work you do. Any last words?
I want to thank you guys for bringing light to this. There's
Sure.
not a lot of people talking about this, or even taking time to learn about, what's going on. So thank you so much. Me and Adam are so
Most welcome.
thankful. And
Yeah,
to
Thank
yeah.
bring
you.
like, yeah, and bringing light to our unit. Sorry, Adam, go ahead.
No, sorry, Emily. Yeah, no, thank you both so much. You mentioned before, Octavio, that a lot of times like stories don't get picked up unless they're like sensationalized. And this doesn't seem so sensational. But yeah, that doesn't mean it's not important. In fact, yeah, on the contrary. And yeah, I think this is a really important conversation to have.
Well,
You
it
know,
will be
and I want to say
it
last
will
thing.
be
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
sensational.
Last thing I want to say. I know you don't want to hear, but both of you are Uptown heroes. So that's it.
Oh, stop,
No more.
stop.
I know you
Yeah.
don't like commending, but Adam, what you're
I
doing is hero worthy, and so is you, Emily. Seriously.
Thank
So
you so much.
let's just keep it
completely
there. So thank you.
completely agree with that. And Emily, also just to speak to you, I think that you're such a great example for our friends and for our neighbors and people of our cohort, people who've lived here, who are second generation, who, are standing up for what's right. And, I think it's sometimes really hard, but it doesn't have to be, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just about meeting up with your neighbors and talking to your neighbors and organizing with your neighbors and having a meal with a neighbor, like
Right.
having a conversation. It's not that hard. It doesn't have to be like, what Avi from the Northern Manhattan Community Land Trust said. You don't have to tie yourself to your neighbor's door to form a tenants union. You just need to talk to your neighbors, and I think that that's important because as much as we are commending you for the fight and for the difficult work that you've done, it's also good to remind people that it's just about being neighbors. That's what is the foundation of the community. So thank you for that. And
Thank you, Octavio. I
Yeah,
really appreciate
really.
you. And I'm internally
Yeah.
said to Adam. He's literally he has taught me so much. He has 15 years here. I don't believe him. I think he was born in Colombia. He's lying about it because he knows the
That's an
ins and
insult.
outs.
Sorry,
Yeah,
that's
he
born in
knows
Columbia
like
University.
all
Yeah,
the ins and outs. He knows everything. He's educated me on my community. So
That's
also,
awesome.
it's also like we have to bring ourselves to a point where we just listen, because we can learn a lot from our neighbors. Doesn't matter what they look like, where they're from. You don't know what type of fountain of knowledge is there. So yes, thank you guys all again, and I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
And
Thank
and,
you,
and
thank you.
hey, Emily, get political, man. Like maybe in a few years you'll be Congresswoman Emily Baez. How do we know? Like it's not a crazy thing. Like we have strength. You have strength.
Thank you.
So thank you very, very
You
much.
guys filled my head up today. Thank you so
No, this is amazing. This is a great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, this has been amazing. Thank you
Yeah,
guys.
thank
Have a
you.
great evening. Hopefully, by the time this airs, we have a new mayor. We will have. Not a new mayor, but a Democrat that we all can live with. So let's
better go
hope.
out
Fingers
and vote
crossed.
7:15.
I'm leaving right now. I'm going right now.
Yeah, go vote. Go vote.
All
Go
right,
vote.
y'all.
Right.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for joining us in this episode of Uptown Voices, brought to you by 181 Cabrini, your neighborhood bistro just steps away from the North Walk of the George Washington Bridge. Use the code Uptown Voices Season 1 for your discount. And to stay up to date on the latest in Uptown, you can follow Uptown Collective on Instagram, Facebook, and X. If you're watching Uptown Voices on YouTube, don't forget to smash the subscribe button and to give us a like. And don't forget, we also need financial contributions from listeners like you to produce, improve, and expand our content. To contribute, please scan the QR code on the screen or visit www.livingamericana.com. That's living without a G. Until next time, this has been Uptown Voices.